Hey, hipsters, it's Blake. I'm the hipster Highlander. I'm bringing you another deck tech today. It's a deck that I've been brewing, that I've been having a lot of fun with around a new commander. And I figured I would, you know, bring a video around. It's been a few minutes. I feel like that this one is definitely worth the wait, though. If you enjoy your time here, always do the like, comment, subscribe thing. I love interacting with y'all, so I appreciate y'all sticking around. So I'll show you what I got today. If you know anything about me, I love dogs. So of course I had to build a new deck around Sophia, Dogged Detective. And I think I got a doozy for you. So Sophia, Dogged Detective is one green, blue, and a white. For a 3/4, she's a human detective. And when she enters the battlefield, you create Tiny, a 2/2 legendary green dog detective creature token with trample. And for 1 mana, you can sacrifice an artifact token, put a 1/1 counter on each dog you control. Whenever a dog you control deals combat damage to a player, create a food token, then investigate. And of course, investigate makes a clue. So Sophia is a very interesting commander. She clearly gives you a ton of value whenever you make dogs, and dogs hit people, and then your dogs get huge from her second ability. So there's a lot going on here to like. But, typically dogs haven't been the best creature type in Magic, and she's, you want her to stay on the board, plus you want to have extra dogs. So how are we going to remedy this situation, and how are we going to make a well-balanced deck? Well, our goal of this deck is actually to make lots of Sophias, which in turn makes lots of Tinies. So how are we going to do that? Well, there's a few cards in Magic that allow us to get around this pesky legend rule that both Sophia and Tiny have. And that's what our deck's going to be centered around. They're cards called Mirror Box and Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. Mirror Box is a 3-mana artifact, and it simply says the legend rule doesn't apply to permanents you control. But it also gives each legendary creature we control +1/+1, which is definitely not nothing. And each non-token creature you control gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control with the same name as that creature. So it puffs up our Sophias to be huge, and our Tinies get a little bit bigger. Pun intended. Sakashima of 1,000 Faces is 3 and a blue for a 3/1 human rogue, and it enters the battlefield as a copy of another creature you control, except it has Sakashima's other abilities. And Sakashima's other ability is that the legend rule doesn't apply to permanents you control. So both of these allow our Sophia to have multiple effects. So as we have 2 Sophias out and 1 Tiny or multiple Tinies, each Tiny will trigger each Sophia that we have, meaning that the clues and food multiplicatively add up with the number of Sophias and Tinies that we have. So this is what our kind of main focus is going to be around, is trying to get as many foods and clues as we can, and getting as many Sophias and Tinies as we can. Now, that being said, I'm sure many of you will be quick to point out that there is actually a third option for this effect called Mirror Gallery, but I find it just too bad to be worth running, so you won't see it in this list, and I tend to recommend not running it. So, jump scare warning, we are going to have a lot of tutors in this deck. As we have very few options to make the effect that we want to have happen, we need a lot of ways to, even if it's not as super mana efficient, have ways to go get those effects. So I will say that these tutors are fairly necessary, maybe not quite this many. There were a few ones that I decided to exclude because I didn't think they were good enough. And you'll see them in the sideboard. But this is what we're deciding to run with. We got 10 tutors. I know that's a ton, but I feel like it's necessary. So we got Fabricate, which allows us to go get any artifact from our deck for 3 mana. That's great. It lets us go get our Mirror Gallery. Finale of Devastation. It's green, green, X, and you can go get a creature with X mana value from your deck or your graveyard. And it can double as a finisher. If X is 10 or greater, it pumps your whole board by +X and gives them haste. This is very good for getting our Sakashima or some of our other creatures that we'll get into later. Mystical Tutor is kind of a roundabout way. As you can see, it's neither of the cards that we really want to get are instants and sorceries, but our other tutors here are. So you can tutor for a tutor, which isn't obviously the most efficient way to do things, but I think it's what we have to do. Recruiter of the Guard is 2 and a white for a 1/1, and it gets you a creature with toughness 2 or less from your library into your hand. So I can go get our Sakashima. Worldly Tutor, same thing. It's a green mana, puts it on top, can get our Sakashima. Spellseeker is kind of another tutor for a tutor. While it can't directly get, Sakashima or Mirror Gallery, or Mirror Box, sorry. Finale, you can go get Finale of Devastation or a bunch of other effects. Worldly Tutor, Enlightened Tutor, the next one allows you to search your library for an artifact or enchantment for 1 white mana, put it on top. Lets us go get our mirror box. Wargate, it's X, green, blue, and a white. It lets you search your library for a permanent card with X mana value or less and put it into play. So this can go get us either piece, whichever one we want more. And Word Invention is blue, 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 and X. And this one is Improvise, which allows us to tap our foods and clues to help pay for the X, which is really nice. And it lets you search your library for an artifact with X or less and put it into play. Really good for getting our mirror box. Trophy Mage is 2 and a blue for a 2/2, and it goes and gets an artifact with 3 CMC and puts it into our hand, like our mirror box. So yeah, obviously if you're a little against tutors in general, I don't think that this build that I have here today is for you, so this is kind of your upfront warning. But that being said, this build has been very fun for me, and I do think it's worth, spending the time, spinning your wheels a little bit with some tutors. So let's move into the MVPs of the deck. So these are the cards that just do the most work in our deck outside of, the core cards that make up our deck. That's Academy Manufactor. Of course, you knew this one was going to be here. It's a 3 mana artifact creature. It's a 1/3. And if you would create a food, clue, or treasure token, you instead get 1 of each. So when our Sophia's trigger, we get 2 of each because we're investigating and making a food. So yeah, it adds up to be a lot very quickly. Especially if we have multiple Sophias, then we're just doing whatever we want at that point. And Seedborn Muse is 3 green, green. It's a 2/4. It's a spirit. And you untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. This one's pretty essential for cracking those clues and actually getting some of your card draw back. In case you start running low on gas. It allows you to kind of, eat your foods with your Sophia's ability to pump your board. And then also be able to hold up mana for interaction / crack clues on your opponent's turns. So while you're kind of building up most of the time in the mid game, these will be the cards that you want to try to go get if you can. Before you start trying to multiply your Sophias. These will help you get the ball rolling a lot better from a more neutral state. So let's get into some more tutor effects. Obviously, we don't want just not tutor effects, clone effects. Obviously, we don't want just the one of Sakashima. We're going to need a few more ways to get multiple Sophias. And while these versions aren't as good, they at least can, help us get the ball rolling when we don't have a mirror box or Sakashima. But we do have the older Sakashima the Imposter. He's 2 blue, blue. He's a 3/1. And when he comes into play, he can come into play as a copy of any creature, except he retains his name, and you can pay 2 blue, blue and return him to its owner's hand. So this will allow us to have 2 Sophias, basically, while still only having 1 tiny, but it at least allows us to, start multiplying our foods and clues. Quantum Misalignment is very similar. It's 4 and a blue for a sorcery. You create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except it isn't legendary, and it has rebound, which means on your next upkeep you get to cast it again. So, once again, multiple ways to get multiple Sophias with Irenicus's Vile Duplication. 3 and a blue for a sorcery. Create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except the token has flying and isn't legendary if that creature is legendary. And lastly, we got another new one. I don't even know how to say this. Atuan? I'm just going to go with that. Soldier. It's 4 blue, blue for a 0/0. It's an artifact creature. You may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it isn't legendary, and it is an artifact in addition to its other types, and has Myriad. Myriad, not the most relevant here, but it definitely can add up really quick. So we got a few extra clones here to kind of help round us out to make sure we can get more Sophias. These are just kind of, you could probably, the clone number here is a little iffy. I've been happy with the number that are in the deck, but there's a world where you could lift plus or minus a few of these. But these are just the ones that I've found to be the best, most flexible, most efficient. Flesh Duplicate, it's blue, blue. It's a clone. Copies whatever you have, except it has Vanishing 3. Phantasmal Image is 1 and a blue. It's a clone, except if it gets targeted, you have to sacrifice it. Phyrexian Metamorph is 3 and a Phyrexian blue, so 3 mana basically. And enters the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or creature. So sometimes it can be like an Academy Manufacturer or an extra mirror box or whatever. Glasspool Mimic, it's 2 and a blue. It enters the battlefield as a copy of a creature you control. This one's awesome because it's just a land whenever you need a land in the meantime. Clever Impersonator is by far the most flexible. It's 2 blue, blue. It can enter the battlefield as a copy of any non-land permanent on the battlefield. So frequently this may end up as one of your opponent's things in the meantime. Cackling Counterpart is 1 blue for an instant. You put a token on the battlefield that's a copy of a creature you control, and it also has flashback for 5 blue. The instant speed's pretty big on this one, and you can use it early game to copy something else besides Sophia, and then in the late game flash it back and really start adding to the board. And a similar vein, we have Quasi Duplicate, which is 1 blue. Create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, and it has Jumpstart, which means you can discard a card in order to flash it back from your graveyard. Once again, very efficient. Do this all the same reasons Cackling Counterpart is good. Less mana on the Jumpstart side, but you get sorcery instead of an instant. So I would in general still like Cackling Counterpart, but being able to cast multiple clones within one effect is still really nice. So next we're going to be moving into a few good dogs. I did lead in early on and say that dogs are generally bad in Magic, but I did find a few good ones that were worth running. So Pack Leader is 1 and a white for a 2/2. Other dogs you control get +1/+1, and whenever Pack Leader attacks, prevent all combat damage, so we build this turn 2 dogs you control. So this will help our Tiny get in a lot better, gets him a little bit bigger, and make sure he doesn't trade in combat or anything bad happen to him. Loyal Warhound, 1 and a white for a 3/1 with Vigilance, and when it enters the battlefield, if an opponent has more lands than you, search your library for basic plains and put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Great, that's a good effect that we want. Ramp is always helpful and useful. And it's just a pretty efficient, good dog that we can get down before Sophia. Masked Vandal, 1 and a green for a 1/3. It's a changeling, so this one counts as a dog. When it enters the battlefield, you may exile a creature from your graveyard. If you do, exile target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. This one ends up being a pretty good clone target a lot of times too. Being able to interact in the meantime while being a dog is really nice. Spirited Companion, it's 1 and a white for an enchantment creature dog. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and it's a 1/1. Just cantrips, nothing really to miss out on here. Just replaces itself immediately, and maybe it chips in at some point for a food and a clue or something. And then K9 Mark 1, it's 1 blue for a 1/1 legendary artifact creature robot dog. As long as it's untapped, other legendary creatures you control have Ward 1. That's great, helps us protect our commander and Tiny a little bit. And you can even pay 1 and a blue and tap this to make target legendary creature able to not be able to be blocked this turn. So this one pushes Tiny in and protects him. So excellent. These are the few good dogs that I felt like were worth running. But we do have other ways to make up for the lack of dogs in the deck. And that's with Arcane Adaptation and Maskwood Nexus. These essentially do the same thing. When they enter, they make all your other things dogs. Arcane Adaptation is 2 and a blue for a enchantment that does that. And Maskwood Nexus is a 4-mana artifact. It actually makes all your creatures changelings, which might be rarely relevant besides just making them dogs. But it can also pay 3 and tap to make a 2/2 blue changeling shapeshifter. So it can actually start, making dogs if you have nothing better to do. I've never found myself activating this card in the deck, but its effect is extremely relevant. Because we do have a lot of utility creatures that we want to kind of round out and fill in the deck with. And these are also great creatures to turn into dogs. They're great cards to clone because they all have ETB effects that, help us shore up the effects that we want for our deck. So we're going to kind of go down the line here. Coiling Oracle, this is a classic. It's 2 and a green for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, reveal the top card of your library. If it's land, put it on the battlefield. Otherwise, put it in your hand. Just a cheap creature that cantrips, can block, can be a clone target in a pinch. Just a good ETB creature. Cloud Blazer, 3 white blue for a 2/2 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life and draw 2 cards. And it has flying. So this one's great to help chip in if it ever becomes a dog. Great clone target. Same thing with Muldrifter. It's 4 and a blue for a 2/2 flyer. When there's a battlefield, you draw 2 cards, or you can invoke it for 2 and a blue, which you'll often do in the early game. Risen Reef is 1 green blue for a 1/1. It's an elemental. When it or another elemental enters the battlefield under your control, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it on the battlefield tapped. Otherwise, put it into your hand. This one goes really good with Maskwood Nexus as it starts working. It counts as a dog, and then also everything after you have the Risen Reef out will also trigger the Risen Reef. So yeah, just a baseline, decent little creature with lots of extra synergy in our deck. Eternal Witness, I don't really need to read this one, but it's 1 green for a 2/1 human shaman, and it regrows a card from your graveyard. Wood Elves and Yavimaya Dryad, they're essentially the same thing. They're 3 mana, they're small creatures, and they go get you a forest when they enter the battlefield. I have a new one here for you, Detective of the Month. This one's a weird one. but it works really well for our deck. It's 2 and a blue for a 2/3 with Ascend, which means if you have 10 permanents, you get the City's Blessing. And as long as you have the City's Blessing, detectives you control can't be blocked. Well, that's really useful because both our commander and Tiny are detectives. And whenever you draw your second card each turn, you create a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token. That's not super relevant. But by the time this thing comes down, it's basically always going to have Ascended. And it's going to make Tiny and our commander unblockable. Skyclave Apparition, basically any white deck. I just play this card in nowadays. It's 1 white for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 non-land, non-token permanent you don't control with CMC 4 or less. And when the Skyclave leaves the battlefield, they get an XX blue illusion, where X is the CMC of the card you exile. This can just get rid of any problems, all sorts of value things. It can get rid of Smothering Tithes to, dock sides after they've already hit the battlefield. If somehow you haven't lost yet, you can at least exile it so it doesn't get recurred. You name it. Skyclave gets rid of whatever the problem is, and they don't even get that thing back. They just get some stupid vanilla XX that doesn't matter. Rex Sage, don't really need to read this one, but it's 2 and a green for a 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, you destroy an artifact or enchantment. Classic ETB creature. So these are kind of my suite of creatures that I chose to pick to kind of round out the deck. As you can see, these are great to make dogs. Sophia is also a really good dog because then she starts pumping herself when you start eating foods or clues with her ability. And these are just really good clone targets. Good ETB value creatures in general. Yeah, it really helps round out the deck and get us the effects that we need for the deck for sure. And to help us kind of work with all these ETB creatures, and in case we need to reset our clones sometimes, maybe we copied a Cloud Blazer early on and now we have our Mirror Box out and now we need to get more Sophias. That's where we have a few flickers in the deck. Ghostly Flicker to start us off is 2 and a blue for an instant. Exile up to 2 target artifacts, creatures, or lands you control, and then return them to the battlefield. This one can also double as kind of a protection spell in a pinch, like if somebody's trying to remove our Mirror Box or our Sophia or something like that. But in general, this is just going to be a value flicker. Flicker our Mole Drifter, flicker our Coiling Oracle, help us retain our card advantage, make sure we don't run out of steam if our Sophia plan early on isn't really working out. Soul Hoarder is a consistent flicker effect. It's 1 white and a blue for a 1/1 spirit. Whenever a creature is exiled from the battlefield, this gets a +1 counter. At the beginning of your end step, you may exile another target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. So every turn, we get to flicker all of our whatever ETB effect is most relevant for us. And it's on a creature, so it doubles as a dog in a pinch, and all sorts of good stuff like that. Momentarily Blink is 1 and a white for an instant. Exile target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. And most importantly, it has flashback for 3 and a blue. So this one is very flexible, and the timing that you use it, you can use it for value, you can use it to protect your things, you can do the same thing later. It's an instant, so yeah, it's Momentary Blink is definitely a classic. It has a very good home here. And lastly, we have the hyper efficient Ephemerate. It's 1 white mana for an instant. Exile target creature you control, then return to the battlefield under its owner's control, and it has rebound. Once again, that means you cast it again on your next upkeep. Just a super efficient 2 flickers for 1 mana, even if it's only on creatures and even if it's only at a particular timing. You just can't really miss out on that sort of value. So lastly, that's kind of the core of our deck. We have a few other things that we need to round out. We don't really have quite enough ramp in the deck yet. So I've added a few extra just good 2 mana ramp, like Nature's Lore, Farseek, Secure Tribe Elder, Rampant Growth, Revisits. I don't think I need to read any of those for you, but they're 2 mana and they get you a land. But I will give a shout out to Relic of Legends here. It's a 3 mana artifact. It taps for 1 mana of any color, and you can tap an untapped legendary creature you control to add 1 mana of any color. So, on our off chance that we have extra tinies lying around that can't attack that turn, or Sophia herself, then we can help use those for mana to help, feed our dogs or crack clues or whatever else we need to do. So, Relic of Legends also is a great target for our trophy mages and our artifact tutors if we need some more mana. So it gives us a little extra flexibility in our deck build, and I've been very happy with it so far. We also need a bit more board protection and interaction. Oh, and I didn't forget about Sol Ring. Don't even comment. I caught you already. And yeah, we needed a little bit more interaction and protection for our decks. game plan, as we're pretty board dependent, as you can probably tell. So we have Akroma's Will, Clever Concealment, and Teferi's Protection. Akroma's Will doubles also as a finisher. It's 3 and a white for an instant. If you control your commander, you can choose both of these modes. The first mode is creatures you control gain flying, vigilance, and double strike. Obviously, that's the offensive mode. And then the second mode is creatures you control gain lifelink, indestructible, and protection from all colors until end of turn. That's the defensive mode. So if we're kind of setting up and getting our beer box thing going, our board can be pretty fragile during that time. So Chromas will help us protect that, but also it can also be a finisher because it helps push all those dogs in. Giving them double strike means they're going to trigger twice when they all hit. So yeah, Chroma's Will, an excellent finisher. I'm sure you've died to it already multiple times in Commander. Next up is a newer one. It's Clever Concealment. It's 2 white for an instant, and it has Convoke, which means you can tap your creatures to help pay for the mana cost. And any number of target non-land permanents you control phase out. This can protect anything. Even though you can only use your creatures to help pay for it because of Convoke, it can still protect your non-creature things, like your mirror boxes or your whatevers. So I've been pretty happy with this one in the deck, and we're a pretty board-centric deck, as you can probably tell. So we usually have some creatures lying around that can easily help pay for most of, if not the whole cost of this card. And then lastly, of course, we have the classic Teferi's Protection. Needs no introductions, but it's 2 and a white for an instant. And it says until your next turn, your life total can't change, and you have protection from everything. All permanents you control phase out, which means they don't exist, and nothing can happen to them. And then you exile Teferi's Protection. So, once again, very board-centric deck. We need the extra protection for our board, so that way we don't get blown out by board wipes. Because even our card draw can end up on board sometimes with clues and other things. And then lastly, we're going to move into a few more interaction pieces here, and then a few general good stuff things. So we have Arcane Denial, An Offer You Can't Refuse, Fierce Guardianship, Swan Song, and Cyclonic Rift. Most of these are pretty stapley when it comes to the format, but I'll read through them for you real quick. Arcane Denial is 1 and a blue for an instant. Counter target spell. During the next upkeep, the controller of the spell may draw 2 cards, and then you get to draw 1 card. So, me personally, this is my go-to counter spell. Even though your opponent gets, an extra card out of the deal, the important thing is that you get your card back. 1-for-1ing your opponents in Commander is not it's generally where you don't want to be, because it means the other 2 players are up cards on you, and you lose a lot of your momentum that you have going. So Arcane Denial is my go-to counter spell, and it's really easy to cast at 1 and a blue. For this deck, mana can be an issue, which we'll get into with the mana base. But yeah, Arcane Denial is my go-to. An Offer You Can't Refuse is only 1 blue mana for an instant, and it says counter target non-creature spell. Its controller creates 2 treasure tokens. The important thing is that you stop the board wipe or whatever terrible thing was about to happen to you. The 2 treasures are fairly irrelevant. Sure, they get a little bit of mana rebate back on the spell they tried to cast, but the important thing is that you stop the thing that was going to wreck you. So, absolutely love Offer You Can't Refuse. Fierce Guardianship, it's a free counter spell. If you control your commander, you can counter target non-creature spell. Otherwise, it's 2 and a blue, but you'll probably never pay that, because most of the time when you want to protect your board, it's because your commander's out. Yeah, expensive card. If you don't have it, you could replace it with some other counter spell. I'd recommend just like a regular counter spell. I tried Dovin's Veto in the deck. I wasn't really thrilled with it. Swan Song, 1 blue mana for an instant. Counter target enchantment, instant, or sorcery spell. Its controller creates a 2/2 bird with flying. Out of these counter spells, this is definitely the worst one. It's a bit limited, but the efficiency is what's important here. And them getting a 2/2 bird is fairly irrelevant here. And then lastly, Cyclonic Rift. I'm sure you've lost to it plenty of times. You probably don't need me to read it, but it's 1 and a blue. Return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand, and it overloads for 6 and a blue, which means they pick up all their things, all your opponents. Yeah, just a board wipe that doesn't affect us, and it's a pretty easy include for any blue deck, really. Alright, and then we have a few recursion pieces in here in case our mirror box or something else important goes away. Maybe we just need to get the ball moving again, and we need to return our Risen Reef to the battlefield just to get that extra little push. That's where these cards come in. Balaged Recovery is a card I basically put in every green deck now. It's 2 and a green for a sorcery. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And normally that's not a very good card, but what's important is the backside is a land, which is very important because most of the time you'll just want to play it as a land, but that 20% of the time you'll be happy to hold on to it and buy your important thing back. Next up, we got Cosmic Rebirth. This is 1 green and a white for an instant, very important. Choose target permanent card in your graveyard. If it has mana value 3 or less, you put it onto the battlefield. If you don't, put it on the battlefield, put it in your hand, and then you gain 3 life. So this lets you regrow anything out of your graveyard, as long as it's a permanent. But if the thing is 3 mana value or less, which is generally the things we'll want to recur, like our tutors that are on creatures and our mirror box and different things like that, then we can get it back at instant speed, which is big game. And even if we don't want a 3 CMC or less thing, maybe we just need a Mole Drifter back or something, we can just still get it back to our hand at the very least. Cosmic Rebirth, great Selesnya card if you're building a Selesnya deck. And it wouldn't be a Blake deck without a Savine's Reclamation in it. It's 2 and a white for a sorcery. Return target permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If the spell is cast from your graveyard, you may copy the spell and you may choose a new target for the copy, and it flashbacks for 4 and a white. Just an absolute house of a card. Just run it in all my white decks. Get you back fetched lands. Get you back your important pieces. Your tutors that are on permanents. All that good stuff. Love me a Savine's Reclamation. So let's get into the mana base. The mana base here is pretty intensive. I don't really find much room for utility lands. Basically, when you look at my list, you're going to see that basically it's just what I think is the essential best mana base. Fetches, duels, shocks, pain lands, battle bond lands, all that stuff. I'll tell you that you don't want to run very many tapped lands in this deck. So if you're on a budget and you don't have a lot of the lands that I have listed, which you probably won't, play the best duels that you can. I have a video that is, a suggestion to you to what I think are the best dual lands to play, but I wouldn't recommend much more than like 5 to 6 tap lands. At that point, you're just better off running basics in this deck, and just hoping that you hit your colors right. You could live with like a Path of Ancestry and a few like rainbow tapped lands, but I wouldn't stretch down to Guild Gates or Life Lands or anything like that. This deck is a bit too intensive in terms of color. So that kind of rounds out the base of the deck. Now I did leave a large amount of sideboard options available for you if you check the list. And what a lot of the sideboard options are dedicated to is a side plan for this deck around Orvar the Allform and Vesuvan Duplimancy. These essentially clone your things as you target them with instants and sorceries, which is, really nice. And Orvar also acts as a dog, while Vesuvan Duplimancy makes non-legendary copies of the things you target, which are both very useful. However, I found them to be a little bit too pulley away from the strategy that I was going for. What these really want are a bunch of extra flicker effects. So when you look in my sideboard, you're going to see a large selection of flicker effects that I ended up cutting because I cut these cards. And I think that there's a world where you could exist where this is basically just a Bant Flicker deck with a small mirror box package to try to, make that work. But in general, I don't think that that's worth it. It feels at that point like you should just play a Bant Flicker deck and not try to do all this cute stuff that I have going on with this deck. So, yeah, this plan really didn't work out. It was taking up a large section of the deck in the first place, but all these cards got sort of cut for the just good basic ETB creatures plus the Masquid Nexus sort of package. I figured that was much more reliable, and it turns out it has been much more reliable. So that's kind of the large majority of the sideboard you're going to see that I wouldn't recommend, but maybe there's a world where you could do that build. And then lastly, I wanted to give a special shout out to Assemble the Players. This is one that's probably going to end up in the deck because it just works really well with the deck. It's 1 and a white for an enchantment. You may look at the top card of your library anytime, and once each turn, you may cast a creature spell with power 2 or less from the top of your library. You'll notice a lot of the creatures that we have that are just good generic value ETB creatures, and basically every creature in the deck almost is all 2 power or less, with a very few exceptions like Sakashima of 1,000 Faces and Loyal Warhound. I think are the only 2 I can think of off the top of my head. All the Risen Reefs, the Clones, the Rex Sages, all of that stuff you can cast with Assemble the Players. So I think that this card will add a lot of consistency to the deck. But at this time, I'm just not... I want to make sure that the core of the deck works and see where I can trim a little bit. to make this card fit in. But this card will almost certainly ultimately make it into the deck as testing continues. But as it stands, I've been very happy with the deck, and I think this is a very interesting build that I hope you enjoy. So outside of the jump scare of tutors and other things, I'm Blake. I'm the Highlander Hipster. Hope you enjoyed my video. Hope you take care of yourself and stay around and comment below and tell me, what you think of the deck. So take care of yourselves. Love y'all.